And all of a sudden, you know, of course I blacked out in and out throughout that night, but all of a sudden you hear like a pack of wolves or coyotes all around us. In every direction I turned, all I hear is woo in every direction, but there's no coyote and there's no wolves.
And I actually seen Satan for the first time. Oh yes, and in her eyes, she just leaned through the window and I mean just cackled.
Hi folks, I'm Kerry Pharr. Welcome to In Your Corner. And I want to tell you, today's story is almost like a Jerry Springer story. The only difference is God got involved and there was a tremendous change. I'm talking about two guests today, father and son, who were actually cooking meth together and went to prison together. But that's not the end of the story. There's a story of redemption. Tim and Gareth Cotham join us today. Thank you, fellas, for joining us on In Your Corner.
Pleasure.
Now, fellas, Tim, I'll go to you first. How did you guys, I mean, you lived in a country town, you know, 100 miles southwest of Nashville, Tennessee. How did you get involved in drugs?
Well, for me personally, I just started at a real young age. You know, had some trouble at home, and I just started getting high when I was probably 9 years old.
9 years old?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and it just, I used just recreational drugs for the first 10 years, and then after that, when I become my age, it started getting real serious, and it just progressed worse and worse and worse, and just become a slave to it.
It owned you instead of you owning it. It controlled you.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. I think for me personally, marijuana was, of course I drank too, but not near like I used marijuana, and I really do believe it was a gateway to the other drugs, the harder drugs, because that's, you know, it just seemed like for me it was just fads. You know, we still have fads today. I mean, they'll come up with a new drug all the time, and it was the same thing then. You know, we would wear one of them out, and then they would come out with a new one. New one.
So
yeah.
Well, you weren't the one that introduced your son Gareth to drugs, were you?
No, I didn't introduce him to him. But you know, later on in life, most of his life, I mean, I was in and out of jail and prison, so. I think by me not being around, I think was just, you know, trouble for him. I think. I mean, you know, I believe I'm responsible for a lot of that. I was.
Yeah. And Gareth, what, you know, so your dad was gone. You didn't have not only a good or bad influence in your life as a father. You didn't have any influence. So how did you kind of get into the drug scene?
Well, you know, I did have a stepdad, you know, and he was a great man, a hardworking man. But it just seemed like we would visit Hornwald frequently. We moved when I was 7 years old to Jackson, Tennessee, you know, just completely different atmosphere. And then when I was 10 to Smyrna, Tennessee, and that's where I was introduced to marijuana for the first time at the age of 10. And so, but we would visit Hornwald, Tennessee on a regular occasion, you know, all holidays and this and that. And I had my granny, which I called Mama Jim, which was his mother. I would visit frequently. And, you know, when I would go visit, I would notice, you know, people would come around and they knew that they called my dad, which is Tim, Little Stick, you know, they knew I was his son. And, you know, he was like a legend down there in Hornwald, Tennessee. You know, he did a lot of bad things back in the day. He moved a lot of drugs and things of that nature. My whole family did. So they were well known. And so that attention and it just drawed me, you know.
So he was infamous. He wasn't famous. He was infamous. But it was,
correct.
But I mean, you liked that because you thought that was cool. Hey, my dad, he's a bad dude because he's done all of this. And so you related to that.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Correct.
And so what happened then, Gareth?
Well, that lifestyle is where I began to find my acceptance, you know, because I always felt like the black sheep of the family. You know what I mean? I always felt like I wasn't accepted. I always felt like, you know, nothing I did was ever enough. You know, I was good in sports, I was good in this, I was good in that, but it just seemed like it was never enough. And so when I found that acceptance down there, you know, it really pulled me. And by the age of 13, you know, I was prescribed, you know, they diagnosed me at ADD, depression, ADHD. I went through all these therapists and all these therapy sessions and all these medications. And eventually, by the age of 15, I was prescribed Adderall, you know, and that's where I really began to abuse drugs. I was in and out of trouble from the time I was 13 all the way up till I was about 17. And I began to do ecstasy at the age of 15 also. And that is where my real addiction started.
And we'll come back and talk about that in a minute. But Tim, when did you and Gareth start doing drugs together?
Well, probably as he got older, you know, when he started getting close to of age, I say 18, 17, 18 when it's on.
18.
Yeah, that's when I really started, you know, when I wasn't locked up. I mean, we started hanging out together, and of course, you know, at that point in time, I mean, I really, you know, I justified it, and I can remember telling him, you know, it would be fine as long as he was with me.
He could do drugs as long as he was with you.
It was okay, you know, because, you know, at that point in time, a lot of people were making what they would say bad dope, and, you know, I really didn't trust a lot of that. But
so you were careful about what you allowed him to take.
That's exactly right, and I figured if I made it myself, you know, I was trusting in that.
So you made it. So we at this point we must be talking about meth, because that's something you cook yourself, right?
Yes, sir. That's correct. That's correct.
So we've only got like a minute and a half left in this segment. Tim, take us through, you know, how somebody makes bad meth, and I'm not asking for prescription, but how you knew that yours was better and you were going to let your son use it as opposed to taking something bad.
Well, I just knew by experience from taking it, you know, you can definitely tell when they'd call they would call it too hot, what we called it, and it would, in other words, it'd be too much lithium, or too much, too much lithium most of the time. And then when it got too much lithium in it, it made you do real strange things. It was just really bad for you.
Yeah. From
your skin to all sorts of things, from tripping out, having hallucinations. Yeah. But I knew, after I started making it myself, I knew exactly what it was in it, because I put the same thing in it every time. I done it the same way every time, and so I just started trusting in that. And I know it sounds crazy. What's so weird about all of it, though, is everything in it has got the crossbones on it. Every ingredient, every single ingredient in it is lethal. It's unreal, but that's why I justified it.
So stick around. We want you to hear the rest of this amazing story. We'll be back in just a moment. So Tim, before the break, we were talking about how you cooked meth and you supplied it for your son, and you felt like that was okay. You justified because you felt like that was good stuff and you weren't going to harm him.
Yeah, exactly right. And you know, I also, you know, it's strange how the devil works, but I really thought that I really thought that he wasn't gaining knowledge by seeing me do it, and all along he was. Because I mean, that's what young people do. They pay attention to what you're doing, how you're doing it, and but you know, I don't think Satan. He never let me see that. See, and then of course
you weren't living for the Lord in those days.
That's exactly right.
You know,
that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, it had been everything but I even got to the point where I started asking him and coming to see him up here in Murfreesboro, because I knew that there was a lot of drugstores in this area.
Yeah.
So I knew that he had lots of friends, and of course it come to a point where there was just limits on the ingredients. So we really
Because
started
the
out
government,
there.
the government started
Yes.
locking down on who could buy
Exactly
the
right.
stuff to make meth.
You was only allowed I think 3.5 boxes a month, and of course, I started thinking about how just to manipulate the system, and of course it was with him, and I knew he had lots of friends, and so what I do is just pay them so much money for each box they got, and then we'd go back to Hornwall and make it,
Now, Gareth, what happens when somebody gets on meth? I understand it's pretty doggone addictive.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, the first time I done it, I was 15. I had tried some crystal meth, and I liked it then. But when I started doing this stuff, I really didn't like it, because I stayed up for 4 days, and I really didn't want to do it again. I kept saying, I'm not doing this again, I'm not doing this again. But
It hurt your body for being up that long?
Yeah, when you're sitting up for 4 days, your back starts cramping, your body starts hurting, and you're ready for something to eat, drink, and you're ready to sleep, But as you come down in that phase, you don't want to enter into that back aching and feeling just sick at your stomach, because I didn't know how to use then. I didn't know how to use that drug. I was a drug addict. I knew how to use other drugs, but I was new to it, so I wasn't eating when I was using. I wasn't, hydrating myself. So, my body was, just tore out of frame. My mind was tore out of frame. I didn't like that. But as I came down, I felt all that, and I didn't want to continue to feel that. I wanted to get back up.
Want to stay high?
I wanted to stay high. And so that's when the cycle began.
So let me ask you, fellas, I mean, people get on meth, and a year later their face looks like, Mars or the moon or something. It's got craters all over it. How destructive is meth to the body?
Oh, yeah.
Very.
Yeah, awful. Well, you can just imagine, everything in it's poison, really. Yeah, everything about it. You don't take care of yourself. It's just like my son just said here right then. You don't drink near enough. You don't drink and you don't eat.
So your body becomes dehydrated. It just shrivels up.
Yeah, you're just not replenishing it with nothing except the drug, and it just literally takes over. I can remember at one point in time, I was doing so much that it was coming out of my feet.
The meth was coming out of your feet.
Because you get to a point, it's going to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
It's coming out somewhere. It's just simple as that.
Kerry is weird. It came out of his feet.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just. Yeah. I can remember getting in the tub and taking Epsom salt baths to get it out.
Would
to
that
pull
kind
it
of
out.
draw it out?
Yeah, it would pull it out with just hot water, and that's how bad a shape I got in. It was, wasn't it, son?
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah,
It was bad.
terrible. Just terrible.
Well, we've only got about 2.5 minutes in this segment, and then we want to go to that redemption story, the next segment.
Yes.
But what happened, fellas? You guys got pretty deep in this stuff, and you ended up in prison 3 or 4 times. You ended up doing some jail time as well.
I did. Well, what had happened was pretty much we had a lot of family involved, and I won't say any names, but we had a lot of family. We had a setup, And
So the family, I won't mention names either, but you're talking about aunts, uncles, cousins.
Yeah,
Everybody was involved making meth.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of money in it?
Not for me, just a lot of drugs for me, a lot of addiction, a lot of misery by that point. By the time I found out, about the aunts and uncles, I knew about the cousins, but by the time I found out about the aunts and uncles doing it, I was already, what they call spun. I was gone. You know what I mean? I was gone. I was barely functionable if I wasn't high, So my main goal every day was to get high. However I could do that, wherever I had to go do that.
Whatever you had to do to get
whatever I had to do to get it. I was strung
Lie,
out on
cheat,
a needle.
steal, yeah.
I was strung out on a needle by the time I was 19 years old.
Wow.
So, anything I had to do to get it. I've done some awful things, but yeah, the whole family, a lot, pretty much.
One thing I'll say too is it gets to a point to where I got off more on making it than I was getting off on doing it.
Really?
I was gonna make it every day, and I was gonna make an 8-ball every day, whether I needed it or not.
What's an 8-ball?
Well, about 3.5 grams. That's what you make out of a box of 15, 220. What? Yeah, 15, 220.
240.
Yeah, that's what you get, and it got to the point where I was, whether I had 3.5 grams in my pocket or not, I was still fixing to make it.
You were gonna make it?
I was going to make it. Whatever it took, I was going to make it every day, and it got to that point. So, you're talking about a slave to it. It's just it takes over, and
it took control of your life, Tim, and Gareth took absolute control.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
And the Bible says that Satan gets a hold of people and doesn't release his prisoners, and for many people that's the case. But we've got to go to a break in a moment, but we're going to come back. You guys were in a prison and couldn't get out without help. And folks, I want you to stick around, because you're going to find out in the next segment how these fellas got delivered from this drug-addicted prison. Stay tuned. We'll be right back in just a moment. Hello, friend. I'm Kerry Pharr, the host of In Your Corner. And I want to share with you some of the things that we've got coming up in the coming weeks on our program. We're going to begin airing a series of interviews of men and women who have overcome terrible addictions. I'm talking about heroin addiction, alcohol addiction, meth addiction, cocaine addiction. These people were, some of them living in a cardboard box, some of them in a mission, some of them in jail, but God miraculously delivered them. And we want to put together a library of resources that you can go to and use to, point somebody to Jesus Christ or to help somebody be delivered. Now, I know many of you have prayer requests because we're getting them from you every week. And if you have a prayer request, please send it to me, at the following email address. It's host, H-O-S-T, Kerry, K-E-R-R-Y, that's me, at gmail.com, hostkerry@gmail.com. And then at 4 o'clock Central Daylight Time, every Sunday afternoon, I am hosting a call-in prayer meeting where you can actually call and speak to me, and and I will pray for you. Not only that, we'll have an interesting guest every week that you'll enjoy listening to their testimony. Some of these people that I'm talking about that have been delivered, we'll have them on our Sunday afternoon call. So I want you to join us, and if you'd like, you can go to our website right now, inyourcorner.tv, and fill out a prayer request form, but you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter that comes out on Saturday morning, and we'll be honored to pray for you. Thank you, my friend. Okay, friends, we're back. I want to ask you guys, what was one of the worst days of your life on meth? Tim, let's start with you.
Well, first thing comes to mind, we was planning on going to cook one night, and I had I'd stored all the chemicals that I needed out in the woods, like I always did, just different parts, of the city. But he had came down that evening with some boxes to make to make it, and he had picked up a girl up here in Nashville and came down with him. Of course, I knew when I first seen her, I asked him, I said, son, her eyes are so dilated, they're just solid black, and I could see into them, and I knew that he had give her some. And I'd ask him, I said, you've give her some meth? I know you have. She's doing some. He said, yeah. I said, well, don't give her no more. Well, he give her some more before we left to go do this. Well, it took an hour and a half for us to go 7 miles. And by the time we got there, I was so upset with him and her. And I didn't even know her. But once we got down there to where we was going, I knew something was strange was happening, because he got out of the vehicle and just took off running, just like something crazy. You know, I never had seen him do that before. And going on with the story, we was going off into the place where I was going to make it, and this girl that he brought stuck her head through the window as we was going off this hill, walking beside us, and I actually seen Satan for the first time.
In her face?
Oh yes, and in her eyes. She just leaned through the window, and I mean just cackled, and then all of a sudden, Satan threw her at least 15 or 20 feet in front of the vehicle, and just started whipping her. I mean, fiercely whipping her. Blacked her eye, busted her nose, all sorts of things.
That scare you?
Yeah.
It did. It did scare me. Yes, bad.
Well, what had happened, Kerry, is, you know, what had happened is, you know, she was very scared. You know, she was very fearful about it, and I was like, it's okay, you know, it's okay, you're with me, it's okay. And she went from that to, she jumped in front of me, you know, I mean, she was scared to death, like behind me, walking behind this car. And she jumped in front of me, and I knew something was strange about that, and she leaned in that car. And what happened from the time she leaned in that car, I was the only one outside of the vehicle. Her feet came up off of the ground, at least 2 feet. And she did like a 180, and what had happened was that whatever it was, something slammed her on the ground, and she started convulsing, and, you know, and I was gonna run, you know, but I thought to myself, you know, the thought I had in my mind was, well, you know, I'm from Smyrna, and she's from Smyrna, you know.
You can't leave her.
I can't leave her, you know, and so we try to get water and splash it on her face, you know, and like, hey, and she finally came back too, but she wasn't right that whole night. But that was definitely the craziest and the worst night of my life, because it didn't end there. We proceeded with the process that he was talking about.
I was going to finish it one way or the other. I was still going to finish doing what I went to do. See,
we proceeded with the process, and something in me, I was always very protective of my dad, you know, because he'd been gone for 20 years of my life. So I was like, well, if the cops are going to get him, they're going to have to come through me first. This was my way of thinking at that time. You know, I was a kid. And so I felt like somebody was after us that night, you know? I mean, we're in the middle of the woods, and I just have this eerie feeling like somebody's after him. Somebody's after us. And so I'm on defense mode, you know? And all of a sudden, you know, of course I blacked out in and out throughout that night, but all of a sudden you hear like a pack of wolves or coyotes all around us, and every direction I turned, all I hear is woo, in every direction, but there's no coyote and there's no wolves.
Wow.
You know, and so that was by far the craziest night of my entire life on meth. It was the scariest night.
That is an amazing story, fellas. And from that point forward, I mean, was that something that caused you guys to turn to Jesus Christ?
As I look back on my experience with it, from that moment forward, it wasn't long after that I was locked back up again in jail and was on my way back to prison. But I believe from that moment forward, my life started to change.
Yeah. Because you think she was either Satan, there was a demonic experience that you saw that night.
Definitely.
Yes.
And I'll tell you how I know that, Kerry. The other guy that was in the vehicle with him that night, actually their life changed from that incident.
Yes.
And they went to we had a family member take them to a conference. And they got there at the end
like
of
a Bible conference?
Yes, sir. They showed up late, and the guy was already praying over people.
And they were running to the altar.
The guy came over to them from praying with people, you know, doing what he was doing, came to him, and he said, I know why you're here. The Lord has shown me why you're here. And he told him exactly about that night, and I don't know the details, but I do remember this from them testifying to me about it. The evangelist told him, he said, if it wasn't for people praying for y'all that night, Satan was going to take your life.
Wow.
That night.
Wow. Well, fellas, we've just got a short period of time left in the show. Tell the people how you were delivered from this and how God set you free.
Amen.
Well, for me, it got to the point where, like I said, when I was locked up the last time, it was either, it was either death or Jesus for me. It got to that point. I looked around, like I said, when I was locked up in the county jail there, I had a brother there, I had my son there, I had my sister there, I had my nephew there. I mean, a lot of my family members was there, and I just had a moment, and I said, there's got to be something, something's got to change. This has to end. And I had a guy that was a jailer there, and a correctional officer, and he just come in every morning talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
Won't never forget it. You could just see the love of Jesus in him, and it just made me wonder what he had. And I just decided, finally, I said, I asked the Lord, I just wanted to make the Lord, Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior.
Amen.
And that was over 5 years ago, and I've not been the same since.
Amen. Thank the Lord.
Well, Kerry, I went to jail right before he went to jail, and when I got there, it was the same thing for me. I noticed, like every day I would look out, like they write names on the board, for women and people who were coming in that's new. And I would notice every day there's a new family member coming in. The mother of my brothers, my aunt, my uncle, my dad came in. I'm just like, my goodness, and but I knew, Kerry, whenever I got arrested, sitting in the back of that cop car, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that God was saving my life. I knew that this was my opportunity to change my life.
When you got arrested, you were being delivered.
I knew without a shadow of a doubt in the back of that cop car. I had joy in the back of that cop car. I was so anxious to get out of that lifestyle, And so when I got in there, Kerry, this was my mindset. I went in there just like this. I'm going to get in the Word, and I'm going to develop a relationship with God. I didn't exactly have those terms in my mind, but that's what the Lord was leading me to do. I'm not going to make friends. I'm not going to get no new numbers in here. I am here to change my life, Kerry, and that's exactly what I did. I did a little bit over 8 months, and I did it in 2 different county jails, and every day I got closer to the Lord. Every day.
Fellas, man, Tim, Gareth, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program. That's one of the most amazing stories we've ever heard on In Your Corner, and one of the most amazing redemption stories. And friend, I want to tell you, if you're sick and tired of the life you're living, if you're so far down that you've got to look up to see bottom and you want out, I want to encourage you to do the same thing that Gareth and Tim did. They said, I'm going to call upon the name of the Lord, and the Lord will deliver me. And just like He delivered them, He will deliver you. And if you need help, friend, I invite you to go to our website, inyourcorner.tv. We have some resources there for you and a contact page where you can contact us. And we thank you for watching the program today, and we'll see you again next week on the next edition of In Your Corner.